Hey, remember being a kid and hearing these incredible stories? Maybe you had a children's Bible with those colorful drawings of Adam and Eve in a perfect garden, or that giant wooden boat with giraffes poking their heads up the top. It all felt so certain, so true. But what if I told you that inside those very stories, the ones that are supposed to be the bedrock of the entire Christian faith, are the exact keys to its complete and total undoing? What if I told you that you don't need a theology degree or to learn ancient Greek to see it? All you need are three pieces of evidence. Three things that, once you really look at them, don't just poke holes in the narrative. They detonate it from the inside out. And look, I get it. This can sound aggressive. And I want to be crystal clear. This isn't about being mean. And it's not an attack on people. This is about one thing and one thing only: seeking truth and refusing to accept answers that we can't question. Today, we're going on that journey. We are going to put three foundational claims under a microscope. First, we're going to unleash the dinosaurs and the brutal reality of carnivores that existed long before any original sin. Then, we're going to take a hard, unfiltered look at the actual character of the God of the Old Testament and ask if this is a being worthy of worship or a figure of moral terror. And finally, we're going to expose the single most unbelievable story of them all: Noah's Ark, a tale so geographically and biologically absurd that it debunks itself in less than 15 seconds. By the end of this video, the Jenga tower of faith is going to be looking very wobbly. So if you're ready for a deep, challenging, but ultimately liberating look at what the evidence actually says, you're in the right place. My name is Farid, and this is The Rational Farid. Let's get into it. All right, first up, let's talk dinosaurs and carnivores. Now, if you grew up in a certain Christian tradition, especially as a Jehovah's Witness like I did, you were probably taught a very specific, idyllic picture of the past. Before Adam and Eve supposedly dropped the ball in the Garden of Eden, everything was peaceful. Lions were chilling with lambs, and dinosaurs, they were pure vegetarians, just munching on giant ferns. The doctrine says that only after Adam's sin did death, violence, and carnivory enter the world. And after Armageddon, in the new system, everything will go back to being herbivorous again. This idea, my friends, is absolutely critical to their entire framework. Because if you can prove that life on Earth was brutally carnivorous before humans ever showed up, or that life today is fundamentally designed to be carnivorous, you essentially pull the emergency brake on the whole belief system. The entire story of sin and redemption hinges on this perfect beginning. So let's look at the evidence. Here's where reality bites back. Literally. I remember watching nature documentaries as a kid, seeing a pack of hyenas disemboweling a gazelle while it was still alive, and my dad would just shake his head and say, "That's Satan's system." But is it? Is that really an aberration? Or is that just nature? When you step out of the church and into a natural history museum, the story becomes undeniable. Paleontologists have unearthed fossil after fossil showing concrete, vicious evidence of carnivorous behavior millions of years before that mythical 6,000-year mark for Adam's rebellion. We're not talking about speculation. We're talking about frozen moments of carnage. Exhibit A. There is a fossil of an Edmontosaurus, a plant-eating dinosaur, with a Tyrannosaurus rex tooth crown lodged in its tailbone. And the most incredible part? The bone had started to heal around the tooth. This wasn't scavenging. This was a failed assassination attempt. A T-Rex actively hunted and attacked this animal, which got away and lived long enough for its bones to start mending. Exhibit B. The famous fighting dinosaurs fossil from Mongolia. It's a snapshot of a velociraptor with its sickle claw embedded in the neck of a protoceratops. While the protoceratops is clamping down, breaking the velociraptor's arm, they were locked in a life-or-death struggle when a sand dune collapsed. burying them mid-battle for 80 million years. Try explaining that away. When confronted with this, the typical religious response is a shrug and a platitude. God will give us answers in due time. But due time for evidence that is already screaming at us from the fossil record? That's not an answer. That's an admission of defeat. It's ludicrous. You look at the 6-inch serrated teeth and the giant talons of a T-Rex and tell me with a straight face it was designed to munch on coconuts. What's it supposed to do if it hasn't found a dead body in 100 miles? Just let a juicy, slow-moving herbivore walk on by? Come on. Now let's bring it to the present day, because the problem isn't just in the past. The Christian worldview claims death and violence entered the animal kingdom because of Adam's sin. So if you believe that, you have to answer this. What about your house cat? Seriously, look at your adorable little feline friend. It's what's called an obligate carnivore. Its entire biology, its metabolism, that requires taurine from meat, its specialized kidneys, its short intestinal tract, those razor-sharp canines, those retractable claws. It is a perfectly designed miniature hunting and killing machine. How then is this loving God supposed to take that cat, drop it into a restored Garden of Eden, and make it a gentle, grass-eating pet? You would have to fundamentally redesign its entire biological existence from the ground up. You'd have to change its teeth, its claws, its eyes, its digestive system, its instincts. It would be completely unrecognizable as a cat. The idea that a lion will lie down with the lamb isn't just a sweet, poetic image. For it to be reality, it requires a complete violation of that animal's nature. It fundamentally debunks their whole theology of the animal kingdom. Once you start pulling on this one little thread, the whole sweater unravels, and you start to ask, what makes more sense than a divine cosmic redesign? The answer is simple. Evolution. Think about islands like Madagascar or Australia. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of their wildlife is endemic, meaning it's found nowhere else on Earth. Did God create millions of tiny, specific ecosystems for each island after they supposedly all walked off Noah's Ark a few thousand years ago? Or is it far more rational that these land masses separated from the continents tens of millions of years ago, and life on them slowly and gradually evolved into the unique species we see today? When you look at a Tasmanian devil and see its DNA is closely related to other marsupials from 10, 20, even 40 million years ago, it all fits together perfectly within a naturalistic, evolutionary viewpoint. The ancient, superstitious explanations simply crumble under the weight of modern science. And here's the most crucial point, the one that brings it all home to us. If animals are instinctually and naturally what they are, predators and prey, locked in an ancient evolutionary struggle, then what about us? What is our nature? Religion points to our natural fleshly desires for food, for sex, for status, and labels them sin, often blaming the devil for our impulses. It's absurd. As primates, as Homo sapiens, we have inherent natural wants and desires hardwired into our biology. But religion takes these perfectly normal instincts, slaps a label of guilt and shame on them, and then sells you the cure. While our incredible intellect allows us to think rationally and regulate our instincts for our long-term well-being and the good of society, many religious systems have weaponized these desires to control people. It's a clever, manipulative tactic. Make people feel broken and guilty for simply being the biological creatures that they are. But once you realize the premise is wrong for the animal kingdom, you're free to see that it's wrong for us too. Alright, let's move on to our second major point, and this one is a big one. The God of the Old Testament. For years, as a faithful servant, this was my go-to argument. I used to argue that objective morality, the innate, unshakable feeling we have that things like torturing a child or committing genocide are universally wrong, proved there was a divine creator who wrote these laws on our hearts. It felt so obvious. How else could we all just know right from wrong? But once you allow yourself to ask the hard questions, once you start reading the Bible not as a manual to be obeyed, but as a text to be examined, you have a terrifying realization. This being, this supposed source of all morality, might not even exist. And even if he did, not only can I question him, I have a moral obligation to do so. Because when you actually look at his resume, it's a horror show. The biologist Richard Dawkins, famously described the God of the Old Testament as, and listen to this closely, arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Now, when I first read that years ago in The God Delusion, my indoctrinated Christian brain immediately rejected it. That's a lie. That can't be true. But the more I actually read the Bible with open eyes, the more I studied the unfiltered accounts without the apologetic excuses, the more I realized Dawkins wasn't being edgy. He was a genius. He just stated it exactly how it is. Don't take my word for it. Let's look at some case studies straight from the source. One account that truly shattered my shield of faith, as they call it, was the massacre of the Midianites in Numbers chapter 31. God commands Moses to lead the Israelites in an attack to avenge themselves. So they go and slaughter every single adult male. They burn the towns and take the women, the children, and the livestock as plunder. But when they get back, Moses is furious. Not because they killed people, but because they didn't kill enough. He says, and this is supposedly on God's behalf, "Have you allowed all the women to live? Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man by lying with him. But the young virgin girls, keep them alive for yourselves." Let that sink in. A divinely sanctioned order to commit genocide, to murder children, and to take thousands of young, terrified virgin girls as spoils of war. Girls who had just watched their fathers, mothers, and brothers be butchered. They were kept alive to be forced into marriage, which is just a sanitized word for rape. Is that the command of a loving, caring God? The Jesus God who supposedly said, "Turn the other cheek"? Or does that sound exactly like the brutal mindset of a Bronze Age tribal warlord using God as the ultimate excuse to commit atrocities? To me, the answer is horrifyingly clear. And it's not just large-scale genocide. The pettiness is just as chilling. In Numbers chapter 15, there's a story of a man who is found picking up sticks on the Sabbath. We don't know why. Maybe for firewood to cook, maybe for warmth for his family. It's a trivial act. What happens? He's caught, he's brought before the entire assembly, and they ask God what to do. God's direct command to Moses is, "The man must be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp." Imagine that. A man murdered by his own community, crushed under a pile of rocks, potentially with his wife and children forced to watch, for picking up sticks. Compare that to the merciful Jesus figure who said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." These two beings, the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, are moral polar opposites. They cannot be the same entity. We are allowed to have an opinion on a character in a book, and frankly, the character of Yahweh is a grossly immoral and unjust figure. And this brings us to the divine parent fallacy. Believers are told God is a father, and Israel are his children. So let's use that analogy. Imagine you're a parent. Your kids disobey you, they don't clean their room, they talk back. Now imagine your response is to open the front door and invite a bloodthirsty mob to come into your home to slaughter your children, to spill their blood all over the floor, to enslave the survivors, and to teach them a real lesson. What would we call that parent? A certifiable maniac, an evil, abusive monster. Yet, according to the biblical narrative, God does this to his children over and over. He sends the Assyrians, the Babylonians to conquer, enslave, pillage, and destroy his chosen people. And why? Because they weren't obeying his specific commands. The story of Exodus even implies he put the Israelites into Egypt on purpose, hardening Pharaoh's heart himself, just so he could show off his power by freeing them later. This isn't a loving father. This is an abusive narcissist. But when confronted with this, believers tie themselves in knots to defend him. We can't question God. His thoughts are above our thoughts. They'll spend weeks meticulously researching a new car or a phone, comparing every feature. But their own worldview, the most important foundation of their life, don't go there. Just have faith. It is a classic textbook case of cognitive dissonance, where critical thinking is thrown out the window to protect a cherished belief, no matter how monstrous that belief actually is. And finally, our third point. Let's talk about Noah's Ark. This one hits close to home for me. I literally had a picture of Noah's Ark on my bedroom wall as a kid. I remember my dad wanting to encourage me, even suggested I prepare and give a public talk at our church on the flood of Noah's day has meaning for us. And I was excited. I thought, perfect. I'm going to find so much undeniable evidence, both biblical and secular, to prove this story is 100% historically true. So I started digging and digging, and I found myself scraping the absolute bottom of the barrel for proof. I was looking at things like frozen woolly mammoths in Siberia, trying to twist them into flood victims. I looked at ancient Chinese pictograms, trying to see the character for boat as a hidden reference to the ark. After months of this, I was left with this hollow, sinking feeling of, I don't think I can give this talk. The strongest evidence I could find was laughably weak. Then my whole perspective shifted. I started watching and reading people who questioned this story, and it didn't take long for rational thinking to absolutely obliterate it. In fact, you can debunk the literal story of Noah's Ark in about 15 seconds. Ready? Here it is. How did the kangaroos and koalas get to Australia? How did the sloths and llamas get to South America? Think about it. The story claims every land animal on Earth was on a boat that landed on a mountain somewhere in the Middle East about 4,300 years ago. So how did thousands of unique species, marsupials for example, get to Australia? Did they hop across Asia, swim the Indian Ocean, and then miraculously forget to leave a single fossil, bone, or relative on any other continent? How did thousands of species of New World monkeys and other mammals found nowhere else on Earth get to South America? That's it. That's the debunk. Even the most dedicated Christian apologist struggles to answer this without resorting to magic. It's a geographical, biological, and logistical nightmare that is irreconcilable with reality. Now, at this point, you'll hear many modern Christians deploy the emergency escape hatch. They'll say, "Oh, Farid, you're taking it too literally." Noah's Ark isn't a historical event. It's an allegory, a metaphor for the church being saved from the chaotic waters of the world. I call this the milky version of Christianity because it avoids the hard, literal claims of the text. But here's the massive problem with that escape hatch. The Bible itself presents Noah as a real person. If Noah didn't literally exist and the flood didn't literally happen, then what about Jesus' own genealogy? In both Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3, the writers trace Jesus' lineage directly back through real historical figures. And who's on that list? Noah. Luke even takes it all the way back to Adam. So are you saying Jesus' genealogy is wrong? When Jesus himself, in Matthew 24, talks about the days of Noah as a real time to compare with his future second coming, was he mistaken? This reveals a deep hypocrisy. When science seems to reinforce a Bible story, it's brandished as historical fact. But the moment science utterly disproves it, suddenly it's, oh, that part was just figurative language. You can't have it both ways. It's not a consistent way to find truth. It's a desperate way to protect a belief. But it gets even worse. You don't even need modern science to debunk the story. The Bible debunks itself. As biblical scholars like Dr. Joel Bawden have pointed out for decades, the story of Noah's Ark in Genesis is actually two different, older flood stories that have been clumsily stitched together. This is why it's full of contradictions. For example, in one verse it says it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. But in another part of the same story, it says the waters flooded the earth for 150 days. In one part, God tells Noah to take 2 of every animal. In another, he tells him to take 7 pairs of the clean animals. Which is it? The people who compiled the Hebrew Bible, the redactors, were taking these different source documents with their different details and even different ideas about God's personality and editing them together. It's like trying to make one coherent movie by cutting and pasting scenes from the 1960s Batman TV show and the Dark Knight trilogy. You end up with an incoherent mess. This isn't a single divinely inspired text. It's a patchwork of ancient human traditions. And the final fatal blow It's not even an original story. Flood myths are found in cultures all over the world because ancient people tended to live near rivers which flood, but the biblical story has a direct, much older predecessor, the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. This story, written on clay tablets 1,000 to 1,500 years before the biblical account was ever put to paper, has all the same plot points. A god is angry at humanity. He tells a hero to build a giant boat. The hero saves his family and animals. The boat lands on a mountain, and he sends out birds to see if the water has receded. The Genesis story isn't a unique divine revelation. It's a borrowed mythology. The ancient Israelites were surrounded by older, more powerful cultures like Mesopotamia and Egypt, and they absorbed and adapted their stories, from creation myths with talking snakes to flood stories. Historians and scholars who specialize in these ancient texts aren't puzzled by this. They laugh at the idea that the Genesis story came first. Looking at the evidence for Noah's Ark isn't like looking at a historical event. It's like peeking behind the curtain and seeing the magician setting up his tricks, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. So let's just take a step back and look at what we've seen. We've seen how nature itself, through the fossil record of dinosaurs and the biology of modern carnivores, fundamentally contradicts the idea of an originally peaceful, herbivorous world, shattering the premise for a benevolent creator. We've seen how the God of the Old Testament, when judged by any modern rational moral standard, is a tyrannical, genocidal, and frankly appalling figure. And we've seen how the cornerstone story of Noah's Ark isn't just scientifically and logistically impossible, but is internally contradictory and overwhelmingly derived from much older foreign myths. It truly creates a Jenga effect. You pull out any one of these foundational blocks, and the entire structure of literalist Christianity, and even other Abrahamic faiths, starts to wobble and collapse. And it's fascinating to watch how, in the face of this, the concept of God itself has had to change. He's an evolving character. He went from a physical being who literally walked in the Garden of Eden, to a presence on a mountain, to a king in the heavens. And now, to escape the reach of science, he's become a purely metaphysical concept, a being outside of time, space, and matter. It's an unfalsifiable idea, designed to always be one step beyond our ability to investigate. It's the ultimate mental gymnastics. And what is the harm of clinging to these dogmatic ancient systems? What happens when these stories are taken as literal truth? Prophecies fail over and over again. Just like the prophecies in the book of Daniel that never came to pass, or Jesus' repeated explicit promises in the Gospels that he would return with his kingdom within the lifetime of his listeners. For 2,000 years, believers have been waiting for an imminent return, an Armageddon that's always just around the corner, constantly having to reinterpret the failed predictions to make them fit. This unwavering belief also creates immense crushing guilt and shame. People grappling with perfectly natural human desires are taught that their very nature is sinful, and they're placed under an overwhelming cloud of guilt by their religion. It's a high-control system that harnesses our very biology for its own power. And for those who dare to peek behind the curtain, for those who start to think critically like you are right now, the system often has a brutal defense mechanism. It labels you apostate, deceived by Satan, and in many cases it practices shunning, a cruel policy of conditional love that tears families apart. It is a painful, disorienting, but absolutely necessary awakening. Like Truman Burbank finally finding the exit door to his fabricated dome. But here is the beautiful, empowering truth. When you give yourself permission to question, when you allow yourself to critically examine these stories, you gain something invaluable: freedom. You realize you don't need a superstitious, inconsistent, and often barbaric book to define your morality. Our secular human society has already evolved far past Bronze Age ethics. We are building more compassionate and evidence-based understandings of everything from human psychology to justice to addiction, treating them as complex issues to be solved, not demons to be cast out. It's like the former Jehovah's Witness fifth famously said, "I would rather have questions that I cannot answer than answers that I cannot question." This work, the work of critical thinking, the work of sharing this information, isn't about tearing people down. It's about building up a more rational, humane, and honest understanding of ourselves and the universe. It's about trying to prevent the next generation from being indoctrinated into systems that can cause so much anxiety, depression, and even suicide. In the end, it's about saving lives from the harm of dogma. If this resonated with you, if you found value in this deep dive and you believe in the importance of asking these hard questions, then you know what to do. Hit that like button, make sure you subscribe to The Rational Farid, and please share this video with anyone you know who might be wrestling with these ideas. Let's keep exploring, let's keep questioning, and let's keep empowering each other with reality. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.